Hello, my name is Fiona Bengo, and today I'm going to talk about the project called A Matter of Perspective. So, this project is in the goal called Addressing Aging and End of Life. So, it's going to focus on that project, and you'll be able to get some information and insights about some of the topics which I'm going to tackle on this project. So, you're welcome to start to listen to me and get information. So moving on to the second slide, we have an outline. So the first thing on the outline is the Mexican artistic presentation of death. That is the first topic that we are going to talk about. The second one is cultures, values and beliefs in Mexico. So that is what I'm going to talk about secondly. Third is purpose of the creative works during the Day of the Dead. So in that presentation, you'll be able to know what is the meaning of Day of the Dead. So we'll move on to the Ghanaian artistic presentation of death, and then we'll go over to cultures, values and beliefs in Ghana. Then we'll go to the purpose of the creative works, fantasy coffins. You'll also be able to know what fantasy coffins are. And then we'll go to social and demographic factors driving changes in perceptions about death in the United States between the 1900s and today. Then we'll move on to the description of the movie It. So I'll be describing a movie that I chose, which is called It. And then we'll move to people's attitude towards death today. Then I'll move to issues related to death and mortality that people in the healthcare field need to be aware of. And then lastly, I'll give you the references where if you want to get more information, you'll be able to go through those references and be able to get a lot of insights. So just like I had promised you earlier while I was reading the outline, I promised you that I would give you more information about those topics that I had mentioned earlier. So the first one is Mexican artistic presentation of death. So in Mexico, during November 1st and 2nd, the Mexicans normally celebrate a holiday called the Day of the Dead. So they have their own language where they call it Dia de Muertos. So on this day, Mexicans honor their ancestors and the dead by presenting offerings. So the offerings can be food, water, and also there are some flowers which are called marigold. So you'll come to find out why they specifically give marigold flowers. So on the Day of the Dead, there were some humors which were associated with the art. So what they do, in order to make it humorous, they paint their faces in the form of skeletons just to present those ancestors and the ones who are dead. So this humor only comes out in public venues, marketplaces, but not in the sacred places. So by sacred places, they mean that where those people have been buried. So the humor must not come there. It only happens in the public venues. So during that day, they normally have iconic things such as Jose Guadalupe Posada and La Calaveras. So Jose Guadalupe Posada, this is a figure also which can be called the Katrina. So this is a female dandy with a big floppy hat with feathers in it. So this is an iconic that is associated with the Day of the Dead. So those iconics must be there during the Day of the Dead. So that was it about the Mexican artistic presentation of the death. So let's move on to the other slide. So on the next slide, we have the cultural values and beliefs in Mexico. So for cultures, there must be values and beliefs. So during the Day of the Dead, mostly the Mexicans have their own values and beliefs. So the first belief is that during the Day of the Dead, they believe that the dead have been given divine consent to visit friends and relatives on earth. So for them, they believe that there is a kind of divine permission that those dead people and ancestors have been given to come and to come again and visit friends and relatives, maybe to just give them comfort and talk to them probably. So they believe that. They also believe that the dead come back to visit and give advice and counsel to their families and friends. So they have this kind of belief that the dead have come to give some sort of advice to their families and friends if they feel like something is going to happen. So they are the ones who are going to pass across a message to those families and friends. So it's a belief to them. Yeah, so to the other value and belief, we have that during the Day of the Dead, families visit grave sites to clean and decorate the grave sites. So they really love their families, their dead families, and they still remember them. So what they can do best is that if they clean the grave and also they decorate it, it can appease the one who was dead, and also maybe the one who was dead can just maybe protect them. They just believe that that person, when they just do good things to their grave, that person can protect them or give them anything that they want. So that was it about the cultural values and beliefs in Mexico. Let's move on. So on this next slide, we have purpose of the creative works during the Day of the Dead. Just like I've told you that they normally celebrate Day of the Dead, which can also be called Dia de Muertos. So on the Day of the Dead, there are some kind of creative works that they have. So the first creative work, as you can see on the photo, which is on the left side, it's called calaveras. So these calaveras are like sweets and they are very sugary. So the purpose of this calavera is to perceive death as a sweet thing. So they make it very sugary so that people won't be afraid of death and appreciate that death is somehow sweet, and it can be perceived as an invitation to another world. So the next one from the left is called marigold flowers. So this one they normally put around the gravesite of their loved one. So its purpose is that it's used to remind people that life is not permanent. As you know, flowers, they mostly wear out quickly, so they just remind people that life is not permanent. You can be here today and tomorrow you are no longer there. So it reminds them. So the other one is face painting, where it's actually funny because they paint their faces in form of skeletons just to present. So the purpose is that it symbolizes the eternal cycle of life, from life to death, then rebirth. So they believe that after someone is dead, someone can also be rebirthed. So they paint it to resemble that, to symbolize that. The other one, it's called La Calaveras Catrina. So that is what I had talked about. This is an iconic artistic device. So its purpose is that it represents the elite European class. So some of the European, they were wearing this kind of hats, which Calaveras Catrina is wearing. So it only represents them. So I hope you learned a lot from this slide. Let's move on to the other. So we have just finished talking about the Day of the Dead in Mexico. Now let's move on to the Ghanaian artistic presentation of death. Also, the Ghanaians have their own artistic presentation of death. So during death ceremonies, fantasy coffins are produced. So when you look at on this photo, you see they are kind of fantasized, those coffins. So they normally make it in form of animals, maybe in form of aircrafts, vehicles, phones even. They mostly create them like those ones. So this mostly happen in southern Ghana. So in southern Ghana is where the Ga people live. So it mostly happens there. So it was started by a man a man called Kane Kwe. So this was the man who made this history, why he started creating that. So the coffins are made in form that are meaningful to the dead person's life. So in this they mean that if a person had a profession, maybe let's say the person was a carpenter, so they will create something which looks like the tool that the carpenter has been using. And then if the person maybe loved cars or phones, they make those fantasy coffins in form of those things. So it brings meaning to it. And then this one was only practiced by Ga tribe of Ghana. So as I have told you, they are the ones who lives in the southern Ghana. So they are the ones who are mostly practicing it. As you can see, they are very decorative with colors, and there are some which are kind of funny because we have some which looks like birds, others like fish, others like aircraft. So it was their own way of celebrating death. So moving on to the cultural values and beliefs in Ghana associated with the fantasy coffins. So they believe that death is not the end and life continues in the next world. So when some people think that death is the end of everything, but for Ghanaians, they believe that after death there is a kind of life that continues in the next world. They believe that there is a next world where when a person dies, the person can move to that next world. They value a dignified funeral to show appreciation of life. That's why they make those fantasy coffins, to show appreciation of life of someone. So they also believe that the disease will continue with their profession in their afterlife. As I've told you, they also consider profession of someone. If someone is a carpenter, if someone maybe was a teacher, they can create maybe something which looks like a class. And then if someone is a carpenter, they can use probably a saw. So they believe that the deceased person will continue with that profession. That's why they create the fantasy coffin that looks like their profession. So lastly, they believe that the fantasy coffins deliver the deceased to a new beginning. So that is most important to them, because if they don't create a fantasy coffin, they think that that person has not been delivered to the next world. So they would like for them to make those fantasy coffins to make sure that the person has reached safely on the next world. So that is their belief. So for you who is listening to me, you can choose either to believe them or you can choose the other way. So that was it about the culture, values and beliefs in Ghana. Thank you. So on this slide I'm going to talk about the purpose of the creative works, which is the fantasy coffins in Ghana. So you might ask yourself, what is the purpose of fantasy coffins? So the first reason is that they are used to remind the deceased of the things that they left behind. So they make the deceased feel like, I left something very important of mine behind. So it reminds them of that. They are used to show the profession that someone was doing while he or she was still alive. Just like I explained earlier, I said that they create the coffins in terms of the profession of someone. So they show the profession. So when someone sees a classroom, they will see that that person was a teacher. Then when see a saw, they can say that is a carpenter. So they are also used to show the social status of a deceased. Actually, these fantasy coffins are very, very expensive. So when you see someone is buried in a fantasy coffin, this means that this person was a very wealthy person. So when they see that person who is buried there, they can see that this person, they can give respect to that person and say that that person had a high social status. So that was it about the purpose of creative works of fantasy coffins. So on this slide we have the social and demographic factors driving changes in perceptions about death in the United States between the 1900s and today. So we are on this slide we are going to start talking about the second part of the presentation, whereas it will deal mostly with the United States. So let's start with the social factors. So one of the social factors is religion, where we have three kind of religions. We have monotheistic religion, ancestor worship, Buddhism, and Hinduism. So for the monotheistic religions, we have Muslims, Christians, and Jews, where they believe that death is a transition to a more religious place, and they believe that there is a sovereign who they call him God or Allah. So this perception for them, they believe that when death occurs, there is that person can be taken to a glorious place, a more glorious place than where the person was earlier. So loss and death, so they take consolation in phrases. So they have some phrases such as God giveth and God taketh. So they take consolation in that, and they believe that the sovereign took their people. So we have also culture. So culture can also drive changes in perception, because as people live together, there is some kind of culture that are being adapted. So the next one is language. So language is also a social factor where it changes the perceptions of people about death in the United States. So in the United States, they normally use English mostly. So that one makes people change their perception about death. So they normally have like an indirect language when they talk about death. Instead of someone just saying death, they normally say like the person passed away, we lost someone, the person went away. So they have like an indirect language that they talked about. So we have the demographic factors. So we have age. So in the past, we found that the people who are dying were mostly the ones who are very between the age of 18 to 47. But these days we also have those people who are old who normally die in the age of 80s to 90s or 100. So this has really changed because of people's perceptions about death. We also find gender. So in the past, mostly the male gender, the ones who are dying, but on this day we find that it's approximately the same number, both the gender, they normally die. So we have ethnicity. So in the United States we have different kind of ethnic groups. We have the Hispanic, the Black Americans, and also the non-Hispanic ethnic. So this has also helped to change people's perceptions about death in the United States. So on this slide I'm going to give you a description of a movie. The movie is called It. So as you can see from the photograph on the right, so that is just kind of a representation of that movie. So this movie is a horror movie where the film was set in the summer of 1989 in the United States. So it tells a story of 7 children who are being haunted by a clown. So the clown was called Pennywise. So the clown appears to them in form of their personal demons in the process. So like there are some children there who are afraid of their father because the father was molesting them, and then there are others who are afraid of just ugly looking things. So it appears to them in form of that. So from the film, the theme that prevails is death. So this is because the clown normally comes after 27 years to prey on children. So in order for the clown, to survive in the imagination of children, it has to keep on killing. So this clown normally appears in the imagination of children. So it's for him to survive, it has to keep on killing. So those people were really, the children were really getting lost. So the parents were so desperate. They were so afraid of what was happening to their town, because many children were being taken away by this clown and being eaten so that the clown can survive. So when the parents are being told that your child is dead, they didn't want to hear that, because they were just afraid of that term which is called dead. They were, most of them could go to school just to wait for their children to come out of the classes, but with no avail, the children did not come out. So they didn't want anybody to mention that their children are dead, but they were just saying that the children just went away, but they will come back. So just to make them just comfort themselves, so they didn't want to hear that word. So this clown was really torturing those children. Even there is a kid, the one you can see on the yellow jacket, also was taken by that clown, and the clown mostly cheats them that they will float on air when they come with him. So that was it about the description of this movie, It. So it's a horror movie and it's quite scary. So on this slide, I'm going to talk about people's attitudes towards death today. So this, I will talk about it regarding the movie that I've just described earlier. So people's attitudes toward death, I can say that the language used is indirect. People are afraid to mention death in a direct way. So they normally say someone passed away, someone went, we've lost someone, that person was taken by God. So their attitude is that death should not just be mentioned in a direct way. So the next one is death should be concealed. So in the past, like when a person was going to die, people could surround the person, just sit with the person until the end of life of that person. But on these days, even when the person is placed in a casket or a coffin, the person, they normally close it. I don't know, they want to conceal the death. So it means that these days, death is very, people are really scared of it. Also, we have death is a taboo. So people believe that death is a taboo because they really don't want something which is death, which is being talked about just anywhere. They feel like death is a very big taboo, so they don't want any person talking about death there. So the next one is death has been influenced by sophisticated medical technologies. So these days, when someone is about to die, we have before a person dies, there are some people who normally don't want that person to die, so they take that person to the hospital, and because they have some medical technologies where they can put the person to just stay alive, like for example the life support machine, so they use that. So it has been influenced by sophisticated medical technologies. So there has always also been changes in life expectancy. So this has been caused by the efficiency of some medicines, where in the past people were being affected by infectious disease such as typhoid, TB. So that was which was killing people mostly. But now we have some diseases such as diabetes, heart attack. They are the ones which are mostly affecting people in depth. They are ones which normally kill people. So those were the people's attitudes towards death. So let's move on to the other slide. So as a person who is in the healthcare field, there are some issues related to death and mortality that you need to be aware of. So I hope these issues that I'm going to tell you may help you. So the first one is that they have to know the family's beliefs about death. So before you make your own decision about the deceased person, you have first of all to know about the family's belief about the deceased person. You shouldn't just make your own decision and do it in your own way, but you need to know that person's family's belief. So the second one is that you need to know the right person to talk to about diagnosis. So there are some people who normally feel like the person who is sick should not be told about diagnosis, but first of all they need to approach, maybe if it's a family, if it is the elder person in the family, so you need to approach first that person before revealing the news to the person who is sick. So the other one is that you should know the types of death which are acceptable and not acceptable in different cultures. So deaths such as suicide, maybe murders, they are not maybe they are not acceptable to some cultures. So first of all, you have to know the types which are acceptable to one kind of culture and the ones which are not acceptable to that culture. So you should be aware of that before making some critical decisions. So the last one is role of each family member in coping up with the death. So there are some people in the family where they say that there are some people who are supposed to take part in them, but there are some who are not supposed to take part in them. So maybe there are children who are not supposed to take part in death ceremony. So you should be able to know the role of each member in coping up with the death. So I hope this will be a help to the ones who are in the healthcare field and also the ones who are not there. So that was it about this slide. Let's move on to the other slide. So I can see I'm at the end of my presentation, where I've already talked about most of the topics that you needed to know. So we have some references here. So in these references, it will help you to get more information about the topics that I've just talked about earlier. So if you want to go through them, just take your time and go through these websites, and you'll be able to know more about the topics that I've just talked about. So the reference still continues. We have a lot of information that I got from other people's articles, so if you just continue reading, you'll get them. So this is the last slide about the reference, and also you can be able to get more information about it if you open the links. So what I can tell you about this presentation is that when you just go through this presentation, you'll be able to know how different cultures have been able to celebrate their own cultural values during death. So there are some people who don't like to mention death, as we found out that most of the people who are in the United States, they don't mention death directly. So we also have how some cultures celebrate their death in a unique way. So as you have heard from the Mexicans how they celebrate, and from the Ghanaians how they celebrate also. Also, if I had time, I could have talked about other ways of celebrating in other cultures, where we have the ones who are Buddhist, maybe also the atheists, how they celebrate it. But I hope you've learned a lot, and that was my time. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you next time.